So I came last year with loads of questions. I've come this year with sod all. So all must be well in the world of racing. And everything's been solved in the last 12 months, no?
Yeah, no, there's no problems in racing. Racing is soldiering on in smart style. But no, it's been. I mean, for us, it's been a good year. We've enjoyed the year. A lot of good racing has been going on. Still fighting the old battle with regard to field sizes and fixtures and that kind of thing, which seems a complicated riddle to solve.
But we're going to get just speak up a bit. We're going to get fewer fixtures in 2015, are we not? Did I read somewhere?
Very small. There's a very small decrease. Unfortunately, when the British horse racing, quite rightly, tried to tackle the issue of field sizes and the competitiveness of the product and the dearth of quality racing midweek, which were all part of their noble cause, they ran up rather against the stakeholders. There's a lot of vested interests when you're talking about any reduction in racing, because racing at the moment is floated on a bed of rights money, engendered from the betting shops, and there's a whole subculture of businesses that exist on that rights money, and for as long as that continues, as long as that situation continues, I think the status quo will be maintained.
Are bookies getting meaner?
Are we talking bookies?
Well, I look at odds now. I mean, I know the market is the market. I'm of the belief, a growing belief, that horses that are priced shorter today than the same horse in the same race would have been 3, 4, 5 years ago. I may be imagining it, but it looks that way to me.
Oh, well, I believe they're becoming a bit more cautious these days. One has to remember that the whole structure of racing, which revolves around an exchange price, has made life tough for bookmakers as far as betting on racing as a product is concerned. It's not as easy as, for example, in my dad's day, betting at 1.5% or even 2% per runner. Like, you turn up there and you put your fingers up, you'd have the wrong favourites and everything else like that. Nowadays, I can see very little point in having an odds compiler. Very little point. You could have, say a company like Bet365, large, successful company. They'll employ odds compilers to price up their horse racing, and they do price up markets the day before. But those markets really are wafer thin in terms of price, completely wafer thin. And if anybody comes on for anything like a decent bet, I think they quite rightly would deflect it, because of course prices are no longer governed by an odds compiler sitting there and working out what price a horse should be. It's governed by exchanges, and the exchanges, because of the way that the way that things have gone with very low liquidity levels up until the time of the actual show, when the exchanges obviously get a lot more liquidity. But before then, they're so tiny, it is so pathetically easy to manipulate, and I'm certain they are manipulated. It's inevitable that they would be manipulated. And so therefore, from the bookmaker's point of view, those that follow exchanges religiously are on a hiding to nothing, and they know it. And so I think they use it as an accommodation service for the smaller fish, for the smaller punter, for the smaller customer. And as long as you're not looking for anything too big, then they will accommodate you. But the other problem, I think, for the punters is that they will naturally, if they play, they tend to fiddle around the day before. They're going to be looked at in a slightly dim view, because any morning or early price that are taken, and where a punter who gets value over the odds as compared to SP, eventually the bookmakers unfortunately going to turn around to the punter, the customer, and say, "I'm sorry, can't do business with you anymore." It's just the way that things have gone. We don't base our prices anymore on a strong racecourse market. We base it on an exchange, and the exchange is very weak. So and the bookmakers are following the exchanges as well as the punters are. So that's where we are right now. It's not a healthy situation. I would love to see the on-course market completely removed, apart from the largest racing days, from the SB mechanism. I think the SB mechanism, at many meetings, has just a ridiculous system now. You can have 5, 6 bookmakers governing the SP, tiny bookmakers as well, following exchanges on track, betting to no customers there whatsoever, say an afternoon at Southall or at Campton and maybe or Weather or maybe at Plumpton or at Fontwell. Very few bookmakers, very weak markets, and those prices are thrown into betting shops and credit offices globally, taking literally millions. And instead of those companies being devising the SP and devising the prices, as in industry prices, you've got a situation where you have 4 or 5 little tiny bookmakers, your Martin and Leicester's, religiously following exchanges. And if William Hill walk up to them and say, well, put us £400 on that 2 to 1 chance and make it 6 to 4 for us, and that's exactly what's going to happen. I mean, it's just inevitable. So it's clearly open to a form of reverse manipulation. It's very easy to govern, and I think that's probably why we haven't reached a situation of industry prices right now, because the larger firms are able to dictate the pace on track. It's just too weak, and it needs to change.
Despite our protestations of 12 months ago, we don't seem to have solved, based on what I saw at Lingfield yesterday and see daily when I study form for VG Tips, we don't seem to have solved the 4-horse race problem. Are they as much of a pain to a bookie as they are for me as a punter and tipster?
Well, especially for the uneducated, those of the people out there who don't understand betting. If I go racing of an afternoon to, say, good racetracks, Newbury, Ascot, York, and whatever, and I'm betting away, and we have a 4-runner race, or a 5-runner race, or a 6-runner race, and then the following race we might have a 14-runner handicap or something like that, we will probably take 4 or 5 times more bets on the handicap, on the larger field, a competitive event, than what we would on the 4 or 5-runner race that might have an even money chance, where one might say the punters would be evidently back more winners, because it's easy to pick the winner of a 4-dog race, isn't it? Especially with one's 100 and another one's 20, and there's only 2 in the betting. Well, it's very easy to pick the winner of that, isn't it? Especially when the exchange says that the 100 to 1 chance is really 1,000. So, but the customers evidently prefer to bet in the more competitive events. And so what they'll do on track, they will do off track. They will play much more, and that's true in our office. We've got a large, the Hennessy on Saturday, for example, will be a vibrant and busy betting heat. Whereas, say we get a sort of long walk hurdle type thing with a 5 to 2 on chance, or a Faheen or something like that. As good as these horses are, they're meaningless in betting terms. We've just come off Ascot, we watched Faheen win, we watched a new one win, and both those races were completely meaningless in betting. In the world of betting, and to most people would barely be tempted to even turn on their television to watch. I mean, who's going to watch them beat up in the trees? If Faheen went up against a new one, well, now that would be worth watching. But certainly it's true that the more competitive the racing is, the more people engage with it, and it's about engagement. That's the success of the sport.
And there's no reason why you should know this, but I was at Lingfield in November, and Southway Star raced, that had won, I think, the previous 4 races, or 3 races, and was 8 to 13 on Bet365 the night before. I don't often get surprised at a racetrack these days, but I was surprised yesterday when one bookie on course was offering 5 to 4 a few minutes before the off on Southway Star, while the others, 1 or 2 hovered around evens, but mainly odds on. No reason why you should know this, because you don't know the bookie or whatever, but why might one bookie have offered 5 to 4 against a horse that was the obvious favourite? Literally,
because, without looking at the whole makeup of the market, it would be difficult to say, but literally he would be following the exchange.
Right.
An exchange, as I say, it is very easy to push the price of a horse out with maybe just a few £1,000 and be on at SP with the bigger layers, the bigger bookmakers, like myself or Star Sports or Ladbrokes' Gold Room or something like that. You can still get decent bets out there. There are decent bets to be had, And all you do basically is manipulate the exchange, shunt the price out with a very small amount of money, and that will almost feed itself. And you can, so therefore, a situation where you can have one bookmaker at 5 to 4, the two even money chart, or the two bookmakers going evens or odds on, they may well have been the big firms betting more sensibly, respecting the weight of money, and looking at all the factors, because not all bookmakers are myopic about exchanges. So some of them go, well, hold on, that's AP McCoy, JP McManus, and John Joe O'Neill running at Plumpton here this afternoon. We better be cautious, because it's a tried and tested partnership. Let's be cautious, or you could get the reverse thing where you might have a sort of Jim Butler thing, or a Jim, or a best horse running at Wolverhampton. Well, everybody would be right to be extremely cautious about those horses, because as we know, Jim Best is one of the greatest trainers in the world, and he can get a horse to improve by 80 lengths.
When I do the analysis and offer the selections to the members the night before, I'm conscious these days that I'm starting to sound like a broken record too often by saying no, very little value in the market, or nothing worth betting on, more 4-horse races, it's crap, it's rubbish. And if I was on the other end, I'd be saying, bloody hell, that's what you say more days than you say it's brilliant these days. And I don't want to be saying that. I want to find another Trio de Lane at 20 to 1 to win a big race, or that's what I used to do since 1998. My favourite winners are and finding something at a good double figure price. Well, it's harder to find these days.
Well, it is, but I mean, but if you're just you're a customer out there and you've got £5 in your hand, and you put £5 on the favourite, say, something running on a midweek or whatever in a 4-runner race, and you go back and you collect £7.50p or £9.20, and you think, well, that's not very sexy, that's not very exciting, I don't know why I bother doing that. Whereas put £5 on and win £40, even if it only happens once every Halagalum Tuesday, will probably get more copy with you. It'll be the thing that you remember the most about that experience. Oh my God, I put £5 each way and I got £62 back or something like that. It's far more noteworthy and will make you more likely to engage in, those type of races. And I think this is why the punters and the customers of racing, be they genuine punters or, as they're called, the customers in terms of like the distinction between the two, more casual investors, will become apathetic about having a bet in something where they can only win less than what they stake. I mean, you do all that yelling and screaming as they come up the way, and the girl comes up to give you your money, or you go and get it off the bookie, and you go, what, I did all that screaming for that?
That's very good stuff, the ownership.
And there seems to be, if I gauge it right online, there seems to be more interest amongst punters in the jumps now than the flat. Is that because there's so much crap flat?
I think when I arrived at Cheltenham last weekend or the weekend before for the open meeting, you see all these fantastic animals come out again. And as we did last weekend, you see your 14s, and you see your new ones, and all these sort of horses, and your Cato Star type animals make a reappearance. And I think it's fantastic. I think it's fantastic for racing when they do. I think though that jump racing has much bigger problems than the flat code, in that once we get through December, once we get through the King George period, it goes into such a funk for over 2.5 months that it is dangerous for the sport to pursue. In my view, it's dangerous for the sport to pursue a path that basically offers so much grunge and so much inactivity from the top animals during those months. And there are things that we can do. We can stop horses like My Tent or yours running in a jumper's bumper. We can do that. We can stop jumpers bumpers on all weather tracks altogether, which I believe we should. I mean, last year we had very wet weather, but it didn't stop the racing. Not to my mind. I can't remember there being like just days and days and days of all weather racing. So we did have racing all the way through the winter, but we saw situations where horses like, as good as My Tent or yours, instead of going up to Kelso, he went to Kempton and ran in the jumper's bumper, or alternatively on a racetrack gallop somewhere. And I think that is a nonsense. I think that is just completely counterproductive. That's negative. That the horses should be offered the opportunity to run in races or not. And as far as the flat coat isn't subject to the same problems because it's littered with top festivals. You know, when you go through from your new markets to your Epsoms, your Royal Ascots, your Goodwoods, your Yorks, and back to Newmarket again, it's littered with top festivals. So it doesn't have a dead period. You know, it doesn't have a dead period. It may suffer from field sizes in September, in particular, in months like that, but it doesn't have a dead period. But jumps racing definitely does. The suggestion I made to the BHA recently was that they considered a month's break in jumps racing, and I've suggested the month of June, in that we have so much riches in June anyway, that we ought to consider having a month off, and therefore by trying to help field sizes, depending by just having a natural break, a defined break, and also to delineate properly the seasons. I mean, you know,
that would be nice again.
Well, I mean, I'd love to know when Tony McCoy's season begins and ends. I mean, you know, they say he's on 365 winners this season. I think, well, okay, well, when did that start? I don't know when it started and when it ends. I know Tony never stops working. If he broke his neck and his back, they'd hoist him into the saddle.
Yeah. But there used to be a clear.
There used to be a clear.
You knew.
Yeah, with 4 or 5 month gap. Now there's no gap.
And some courses will probably, I'm in a toaster, I think, has gone down the Greyhound line. I read a book recently that reminded me or told me that cities like Manchester and Birmingham used to have their own race courses in days gone by.
They did. Toaster thing is particularly disappointing because, you know, the racing has been, you know, confined, I think, to the middle of the track, such a long way away from the people. Whereas, you know, the dog track is apparently in the way and all the rest of it, and, you know, got rid of their Boxing Day fixtures and everything else like that. I think it's, you know, it's terribly disappointing that to put in. I mean, and greyhound racing is hardly the sport to be jumping on the bandwagon right now. It's dying a death.
And Newcastle lost its battle in the last year to try and get all weather.
Quite right. Absolutely right. And the reason why I say it's absolutely right is because they never asked permission, you know, and they threatened British racing with legal action. I mean, Jockey Club lost, I think, 59 fixtures from Kempton. I didn't see Bazalgette rattling his sabre in court with the British Horse Racing Authority and say, you can't just take my 59 race meetings away from Kempton. He basically was almost gentlemanly about it, whilst, you know, raising their objections to it. Whereas Arena, at the prospect of, you know, they had muted that they would have a racetrack, floodlit racing and everything else like over a straight model, intensely boring. They basically have threatened British racing, and I think it's still hanging over British racing's head, with court action. But they never asked permission. Permission hadn't been granted for their fixtures. So I don't know where they get off with saying, oh well, you know, we feel we ought to have a fixture.
What would your dad make of racing today if he came back and the betting industry?
Well, he wouldn't be betting on course, I can tell you that right now, because you know, it's just changed. He's not. He would find it even in days of yore. If he didn't like the figures, he would just announce, I don't like the figures, and just not bet. And just walk away and just not bet.
So I was reading a book on Foynaven and the 67 Grand National.
Yeah.
Which I think your father did very nicely.
Yeah, because a lot of the bookmakers would have made a lot of money out of that particular race. You know, it's not often 100 to 1 chance wins the Grand National. Although we did have, was it Aurora's a couple of years ago? Which was great for racing, and a huge tonic for the levy, as it turned out. But if the figures weren't there, he wouldn't be racing. And these days you go to a lot of the race meetings, and you would on-course bookmakers would struggle to take a grand a race, literally struggle to take a grand a race or less, which would just be, I mean, for him, you know, as indeed for me these days, I need to bet to a certain figure, a certain percentage figure, because people are going to walk up to me and say, Geoff, I want a 5,800 each way, that 6 to 1 chance or something like that, and expect me to lay them. Well, unless I can take a reasonable field size to pay for that bet and bet to a reasonable betting margin, it's just not worth me taking that. So the decision for me is, regrettably, most days, not to go racing at all. And racing, for example, meaning, with regard to Channel 4, And okay, you can take this with a pinch of salt because I've appeared on it a couple of times and all the rest of it. But I remain positive about Channel 4 because it's commitment to racing. You can see 6 or 7 races, on a Saturday afternoon, and they do throw millions into their coverage. It is a quality program. I think what upsets people is the fact that they don't have their own version of their game show host in front of the camera that they would like. I always hear people say, "Oh, I don't like Graham Cunningham, or I don't like Nick Luck, or I don't like, Tanya Stevenson or something like that." Well, I think that's about personalities. Yeah. Everybody's got their own. I don't like Jonathan Ross, but some people say, "Well, let's have Matt Chapman, or let's have, we've lost Claire, but everybody's got a different view of who they want sitting in front of the camera."
But leave that to the chat shows and the game shows. The coverage of racing shouldn't be about the personality that fronts it.
The fact that what we want in racing is coverage, and good coverage, and they do deliver on that. And I believe that they will get I believe that they will optimise the mix.
Yeah.
They will optimise the mix in time, given enough time. But we can't ignore the fact that they are investing an awful lot of money, time, money, and programming to British racing. It would evidently make more money than put a show of Lookout Lassie would probably make more money in terms of advertising than what Channel 4 Racing does.
No, and it's settled down, as is the way with all programmes when they're reinvented or TV coverages.
Yeah.
Or a new production company take over, it's definitely improved and settled down.
Some people say to get rid of Big Mac, but Big Mac is positively mad. So why would we want the sport to be? Big Mac will argue one way one day and another way the other day. In fact, I've sat down with Big Mac and heard him argue against himself with regard to a mindful of subject. So is he positive for racing? I don't believe he is.
But Alistair Down might be back.
He may well. Oregon's Gift, we're on.
We're on what? Oregon's Gift?
It's Derek. Tomo is doing the commentary here, so you won't be absolutely sure.
It's a photo!
It's a photo.
Leave that to the judge.
1 by 5 lengths.
So how much time do you spend?
We're in the lead. Tomo, give it to us straight. Here on the outside, that means 8 lengths back.
You won! We won!
Your office is in Brunswick.
The office is in Windsor, and
Obviously, your neighbours.
which is where I've come